Welcome to the SharePoint Patterns and Practices webcast, and this time we're going to talk about the asynchronous pattern for creating modern sites. And let's slightly talk about what does that actually mean. So in the PnP guidance, we've been in the past explaining what is the asynchronous way of creating site collections. And a lot of our samples are actually showing how to make that happen. But a lot of the samples are showing how to make happen with the classic theme site or a classic publishing site. So in this time, we're going to talk about kind of a modernization of that one. So how do we create a modern Office 365 group associated theme site, the modern theme site, or communication site, and how do we use the latest and greatest from an Azure side, meaning Azure Functions, and obviously Azure WebJobs is an option as well. So we have a sample which is available for you to download, and we're going to have a closer look on how to make the whole thing work together with the remote provisioning patterns. My name is Vesa Juvonen. I'm a senior program manager from SharePoint Engineering, and with me today as the default or the primary presenter, let's put it this way, is Paolo Pialorsi. So Paolo, will you do the quick intros as well?
Yes, thank you, Vesa. I'm Paolo Pialorsi from psys.com, which is a company of my own. I'm a consultant focused on Office 365 and SharePoint Online, and I'm an MVP on Office Server and Services.
Excellent. And an MCM and a lot of other stuff as well. Paolo is one of those pretty active guys in the Office 365 and SharePoint Online side. So, like mentioned, Paolo is going to lead the presentation today, and I'm going to jump in and ask questions where needed. But Paolo, please take it away.
Okay, thank you. So let's start setting up the scenario for today's webcast. And the scenario is the one where you want to programmatically create a modern site using .NET Framework in our context, and being able to leverage the capability that we offer through the PnP core library to help you easily create a modern site programmatically. Moreover, we will see how you can do that using a delegated token, which will be transferred from a front-end web application, which will be the UI to start the creation process of a modern site, to a back-end set of services, which can be an Azure function on an Azure WebJob, both of them based on an Azure Blob Storage Queue in the middle, to have an asynchronous site creation pattern, which, as Vesa already said, is a well-promoted pattern in the PnP area. Moreover, because often when you create a new site, and also when you create a modern site, you need to apply a custom PnP provisioning template on top of that site. We will see through this demo how you can use the PnP provisioning engine in order to enrich the site that you just created using the programmatically approach. So we will see how,
Yeah, before we go forward on this one, so just to reiterate a few things in here. So first bullet point is super important, which we actually haven't demonstrated that often in the PnP samples in the past. So what we're doing here, using delegated token, it might be unclear for some of the people watching the webcast, but what it means is that we're using the identity of the person, even though our process is asynchronous. So essentially, we use the delegated token. We take the token, pass it through to the Azure operations, and even though the whole process is asynchronous, and this is because the access token has a life cycle of, is it 15 minutes, Paolo? Do you remember? Something like that?
Should be 30, but 30? I'm not 100% sure.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. And the other thing, what I wanted to reiterate, what you said on the last, quite often people have a requirement of applying PnP template, but if you're not familiar what is a PnP template, what it means is that you don't want to have just out-of-the-box theme site. You don't want to have out-of-the-box communication site. You want to have a custom branding. And that's where you use remote provisioning techniques. Essentially, you use code to apply a custom theme or a colors or a logo or a whatever on the site. And the PnP provisioning engine is no doubt the easiest way to make that happen. So, sorry for Paolo jumping in, but just reiterating.
Totally okay.
Cool.
Totally okay. And so let me try to explain you the architecture of the solution that we will see in practice through the demo, and then we will move to the real demo. So from an architectural perspective, first of all, we have a web application, which is an ASP.NET MVC application, which can be hosted wherever you want, on an Azure website or wherever else. And this application is configured in the Azure Active Directory of your target Office 365 tenant, so that there you will have proper permissions to create modern sites and to access all of the tenant resources needed to create a modern site. We will do it programmatically in the C# code of the ASP.NET application. On the other side, we have SharePoint Online and the full Office 365 offering. And in the SharePoint Online side, we will create the modern sites. But in order to do that, we have two different approaches that we will see. The first one is based on an Azure function. So whenever the end user wants to create a new modern site, there will be a message stored in a queue, in an asynchronous queue based on the Azure Blob Storage Queue engine. And there will be an Azure function which will queue the message and create the real modern site using the programmatic approach, using the PnP core library, and applying a provisioning template on top of the just created site. Likewise, on the other side, if you want, you can use a web job. So you can still use a blob storage queue to store a message, which will be still queued by a web job, this time instead of an Azure function. And later on, the web job will still create a modern site and apply a provisioning template. So the key point of this architecture is, first of all, to show you how to manage an asynchronous approach, including the transferring of an access token from the front-end application to the back-end services, whether they are the Azure function or the web job. Moreover, the idea of this solution is to show you how you can, using .NET code, programmatically create a modern site and apply a template on top of it. Moreover, maybe we should just a little bit expand about when you should use an Azure function or when you should use a web job for such kind of solutions. Well, basically, both the Azure function and the web job can be useful whenever you have to create a background working process. One of the main differences between the two of them is that usually an Azure function is meant to be used for short-running processes. When I say short-running processes, I mean no more than 5, or correct me if I'm wrong, there's a 10 minutes, which is a configurable option for you. Yes. But if you have to do more, if you have to run a very long-running process, like a 20 minutes, half an hour process or something like that, you can't and you shouldn't use an Azure function. On the other side, you have the web jobs, which can be used for very long-running processes if you need it. And you can almost do the same stuff in both of them. You can run .NET code, you can run PowerShell scripts or whatever else. But the main and key difference is about how long it will take to run your asynchronous process.
And on that one, let's just reiterate again. So we're recording this in the last days of 2017, and currently the situation is that in Azure Function, the default timeout is 5 minutes, and then you can increase that to 10 minutes, and obviously this could be changed in the future. But what the timeout actually means is that the process running the code will be shut down by default after 5 minutes. And that means if the process is in the middle of doing something, boom, it will just go, essentially go away. And that's then can cause challenges. So the web job can be actually adjusted to be executing in a more reliable way. Now, on the timeout discussion, which we could record another webcast completely, there's also the timeout on the Azure, on the SharePoint Online side, which you cannot adjust. So there's two timeouts in place. There's to how long the process in Azure is running, and that could be, in Azure Function case, up to 5 minutes by default, can be increased to 10. In the SharePoint Online side, there's also the request timeout, so how long the operation can take maximum on the SharePoint Online side. But that's per operation, not per execution of a process, so it's slightly different again scenario. Maybe a topic which we shouldn't deep dive on this webcast.
Yeah.
But basically, as a rule of thumb, if you have a long-running operation more than 5 minutes, maximum 10 minutes, use a web job. Absolutely suitable, absolutely more better, absolutely future-proof process as well. Azure Function more for operational fast, let's say 1 minute max or whatever, 5 minutes or 10 minutes max, obviously, from a timeout perspective. And maybe just to mention, the sample which is available, this obviously isn't meant to be used as such in production. This is meant to demonstrate these two options. And then you can take the sample, you can modify that, you can hide the option which you don't want to expose for your, or you don't want this, let's say, how would I put it? The sample shows and asks from the end user, do you want to use Azure Function or a web job? In real life, you wouldn't obviously do that. You would just use Function or a web job. So you would adjust the sample based on your business requirements. Just to be super clear on that one as well.
Yeah, you have to make your choice. Yeah,
exactly. And do some modifications. So these samples are not meant to be used as such immediately into production, but you can play around with the technology and learn how things can be done, and then adjust those based on your business requirements.
So cool. Let's move to the demo. So we can see how it works, how it is defined, and we can enjoy it. So let me switch to my Visual Studio environment. And here we have the solution, which is available in the PnP repos in the samples folder. Now, this solution is based on 4 different projects. The first and main one is the root 1 provisioning.cloud.modern.async, which is the name of the solution in the PnP repo 2. And this is the web application, the MVC ASP.NET web application. Moreover, there is an infrastructure project which is used just to have some shared types which are shared across the Azure Function project and across the WebJob project. So let's start having a look at the solution. So let me run it, and then I will explain you how it works under the cover. So let me press F5, and I will show you how it behaves in the browser. So let me move my browser here on the right screen. And soon we will have the login screen of Azure Active Directory in order to access our Azure AD and our Office 365 target tenant. And here we are. I will provide my credentials. And right after that, I will be in the home page of my web application. As you can see, here you have a few input controls that you can use to configure the modern site that you want to create. And for example, you can create a team site or a communication site. You can give it a name. Based on the kind of site that you will create, you can adjust the input argument for the site creations. Let's say that we want to create a communication site and call it PnP Webcast Async Modern Sites. What a fantasy. Okay. This is the site alias and the site description as well. Let's use the Azure function, for example, but as we told you here, you can select to use the web job as well. It's up to you. And just for the sake of making an example, we have 2 predefined templates, PnP Provisioning Template, which you can use, which you can apply onto the target site. Let's select the first one, for example. By clicking on the Create button, there will be a message stored in the blob storage queue on Azure, and there will be an Azure function activated by the existence of a message in the queue. So by clicking on the Create button, we will just enqueue a message. As you can see, site creation successfully enqueued. So the site is not yet there, has not yet been created. But if I switch to my Azure Management Portal, here we can see that we have a modern provisioning function, which is here running. And if I go to Monitor, for example, I will be able to see that pretty soon there will be one more execution. It's a matter of few seconds usually, or I can go back here and have a look to the real-time log, and in a matter of 2 seconds, we will see the Azure function starting. Here it is. Now, as you can see, there is a progress set of log information in the log of the running Azure function, and now we have completed the creation of site column in the target site. We are applying some tenant settings and some other stuff, and now the function is fully completed. So if we go back to our application and we open the browser targeting the tenant in which we created the solution, this will be the modern site, the modern communication site that we just created. My browser is going to log in against Azure AD one more time to access the SharePoint Online environment. And now we have the modern communication site in which, if I go to the site content, I can even see that I have a custom list which have been provisioned by the PnP Provisioning engine. So that's the overall idea of the application. So let me switch back to the source code and let me explain you how it works. So I will stop the debugger and let me open the home controller, which is the only one we have. And in the home controller, we have a create action, which will be the one which will get the HTTP post request from the home page. And here, once the model state is valid, we can just retrieve some information, like, for example, the access token of the current user, and we will store the access token of the current user in the model object that we have, and which will be the object that we will serialize in the blob storage queue. So we get the target URL of the target SharePoint Online environment, the access token of the current user, so that we will act on behalf of the current user. We define if we want to use an Azure function or an Azure WebJob, because based on the selection, we will have a target queue. We will have one queue for the WebJob and another one, a different one, for the function. And moreover, in the model object, if I press F12, you can see we have, bunch of information like the site type, which right now can be a team site or a communication site. We have the title, the alias, and all of the inputs that we provided through the web UI. Once we are ready and we have the model fully configured, we simply use the blob storage queue client of the model to create or to connect to our storage account, to create a queue if it does not exist, and to enqueue the message into the queue so that on the other side, whether the Azure function or the WebJob will be ready to dequeue the message. And on the other side, let's take, for example, the Azure function that we saw. We have a function. So it's an Azure function project created in Visual Studio 2017. Here we have, from a NuGet perspective, a reference to the PnP site core library, together with some other NuGet packages. And in the run method of this function, we have a queue trigger attribute, which will say, okay, whenever there is a new message in a blob storage queue with this name within this blob storage connection, let's run the function. And the function will simply get the current path, the path in which is running the application if we are in debug, or we simply use an environment variable if we are running the function on Azure. And then we'll use an helper type, which is the modern site helper, to create a modern site using the input message, which will be the one stored in the queue, as well as the path from which the provisioning template can be retrieved. In fact, in the Azure function, we have a couple of sample PnP provisioning templates. This one is the template 01, which is the one we used before. And as you can see, here we create a new list instance, which is the custom list 01, with all of its features, as we saw in the real site created by the solution. Now, the key point is what the create modern site function does under the cover. So let me dig into it. This one simply gets as an input a JSON string, which will be the serialization format of the blob storage queue. So we get the JSON serialization of the model, which will define what are the features, what are the properties of the modern site that we want to create. Then we have the path in which we will find the template and some other useful information to do some logging. we deserialize using the Newton's of JSON library, the JSON of the message, in order to get back a domain model object which will define the site that we are going to create. We use the Authentication Manager class of PnP to access the SharePoint Online environment using the access token that we have in the domain model object. So, as you remember, when we created the site, we stored in the message which have been enqueued in the blob storage queue the access token of the current user. On the other side, we simply get back the access token and we access the target SharePoint Online environment with that access token. This will give us back a client context of SharePoint Online, which we can use to interact, to use the client-side object model of SharePoint targeting the SharePoint Online environment. So, once we have the client context of SharePoint Online, of the client-side object model of SharePoint Online, we can simply define if we need to create a communication site or a team site, and using some extension methods that we provide in PnP Core, we create a site asynchronously, and the site can be a communication or a team site. Whether it is a communication or a team, we will have a little bit different input parameters. So, for example, when we create a communication site, we can define the local ID and some other stuff, while when we create a team site, we have the alias, for example, and we can make it public or private. But regardless the details about the input parameters, at the very end, you will have the modern site created for you. Once you have the modern site created, still using the same access token as before, keep in mind that an access token expires. So if I'm not mistaken, it has a timeout of 30 minutes. So you will have to complete the full process in 30 minutes. Otherwise, you will have to slightly review the architecture of the solution, and you will have to provide not only the access token, but also the refresh token to be able to refresh the access token when it will expire. But as long as you stay shorter than 30 minutes, you can just use the one access token that you have to do the full process.
Obviously, just quickly on that one, obviously you could always fall back on the app-only process as well for some of these operations. But again, that's an option, but not necessarily an optimal option. So.
Yeah. And as we said, you will need to slightly update and change the solution, which is just a kind of a starter kit for you. So it's not a ready-to-go solution. So here we decided to reuse the same access token and the same approach with the authorization manager to have a new context, which will be the client context of the just created site, so that once we have the new client context, we can apply a provisioning template onto the target website that we just created. And that's all. The same story applies for the web job. So it's really easy to figure out how it works, because it does exactly the same story, but on the web job side. So we still have a method which will be queue triggered based on another queue. And once we have a new message in the queue, we still use the create modern site helper method of the helper class, and we do the same as before. So really easy and simple, let me say, architecture once you understand the key elements of the architecture.
Absolutely.
Now, a few more words about the solution before going back to the slide deck. Let me open one more time my browser, and let me switch to another account to show you on the Azure side the registration of the application that we have. Here I'm in the target tenant in which I created the application. I will go to Azure Active Directory and to the app registration section. Here I will use the client ID of my web application, which is this one. Oops. Okay. To search for my target application, and here it is. This is the application we are using from the ASP.NET perspective, as well as from the background jobs perspective or function perspective. If we go to the required permission section of this application, you can see that here we have a permission from a Microsoft Graph perspective, which is the delegated permission to read and write directory data. Moreover, from a SharePoint Online perspective, we have two delegated permissions. One is read manage metadata, and one is have full control of all site collections. Using these permissions, as well as having the permission to sign in the currently connected user, we can run the full application. So you will find all of this information well documented in the PnP repo. But in order to have this solution to run properly, you will need to configure those permissions for your application in your target tenant. Okay? So, I don't know if you have any other feedback or addendum, Visa, or if we can just come back to the slide deck.
No, I think you went it through really, really well. So I think we can go back on the slides and wrap up the webcast. I think it's clear what's the difference between the Azure Functions and the WebJobs. And like I said, the underlying technology in Azure side is slightly different. So the Azure Functions for shorter operations, Azure WebJobs for long-running operations, which can adjust slightly more detailed to the timeouts on that one. But other than that, I think that the sample is great, considering that we do have a lot of these provisioning solutions samples in PnP, and we do know that there's a lot of customers who have implemented this kind of a self-service site collection creation story and provisioning logic in their tenants. Now, one thing which we probably want to talk about slightly now that we're on this last slide of the presentation as well is around the hey, should you use the self-service site collection creation story or the out-of-the-box provisioning story? Because in the out-of-the-box provisioning, you can have a site design supplied, and you have the nice UI for selecting the site, the modern theme site / the communication site. Any feelings from your side, Paolo, on this one? And I can reiterate on that.
Yeah. Well, let's say from my side, I think that we should try to use as much as we can the self-service site creation from the SharePoint Online side, so the one with the site design, considering that if you want, using a site design, you can even trigger a Microsoft Flow, which can then trigger a PnP Provisioning Template. However, there are scenarios in which, for example, you want to have an approval process when you create or when you ask to create a new site, or maybe you want to do more than applying a site design and eventually PnP provisioning template. So in such scenarios, having a custom developed solutions on top of the tenant still works in my mind. But for real simple solutions in which end users simply need to create, self-service create modern sites, I think the site design approach is the best one. That's my understanding, at least.
Yep. So, and absolutely agree on that. So, so the out-of-the-box story, absolutely. If you can take advantage of that one, please do, because that's the most cost-efficient model out there. Now, there's a lot of customers who have invested on the existing platforms before we provided that new nice UIs in the SharePoint Home for creating the sites and the site designs, and they might have invested on these custom solutions. The key story of this sample is to show how you can modernize those solutions to also provision modern theme sites and modern communication sites, and still use the PnP provisioning behind of that. Now, and the reasons might be the approval process, like mentioned, and yes, we're looking into having approval process in the native site design process as well, or it might be that it's much more complex story. It might be something which is depending on on-premises data, hybrid data. There might be much more long-running operations, and you don't want to have the end user arriving to the site until the whole operation is completed. But again, and debatable, absolutely debatable. But I think that's it for this one. So thank you, Paolo, for a great demo and a great solution. We'll have the sample referenced in the webcast notes and all of the other material available. But thank you, Paolo, for this one, and we'll come up with a new webcast sooner or later. Thank you. Bye-bye.